The following true stories involve a Hitler sex change and exploding pancakes. Viewer discretion is advised.
A 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3. When discussing History Channel and its evolution into a rabbit hole of madness, it might be tempting to say that it went through an inglorious fall from greatness, a tumble from the shining city on a hill it once occupied. But when studying its content down on a more precise standard, we discover that from its start, the station made certain choices that were heavily questionable even then. Because before History was infamous for its focus on reality TV, or its hunt to present sci-fi conspiracy theories as facts, or its obsession with doomsday apocalypse predictions, it was known by one simple nickname: the Hitler Channel, which it gained for its notorious scheduling of sensationalist around-the-clock documentaries about every aspect of Nazi Germany. Now, it should be clarified, there is absolutely no problem with making documentaries about this particular topic. In fact, a few videos ago, I plugged a documentary which is primarily about what happened at the end of the war, which I still suggest you guys check out if you haven't yet. When done right, a documentary can serve as a historical record, which is much more palatable and understandable than real historical record. And there is no place in history where this is more important than the atrocities of the Holocaust, because we're currently only 10 or 15 years away from there being no survivors left. If there was no way for future generations to understand the horrors that happened on a deep, empathetic level, well, as they say, history might repeat itself. But most of you probably understand that when I say bad Nazi documentaries, these aren't the kind of films that I'm talking about. You remember those guys you knew in high school who were like really into learning about the Nazis, but they never talked about the atrocities committed or lessons to learn? They just sort of argued about which tanks were the best? Those guys work for History Channel now! Or they joined the military, it's one of the two. From the moment History Channel started, its perspective on Nazi Germany was sensationalist more than it was educational. One of the first pieces to premiere was titled The Occult History of the Third Reich, and was also one of the first shows to claim that the entirety of Nazi history could be blamed on the supernatural. This is something we'll get into a little more in a moment. Like most of the topics we've talked about in this episode, history was not alone in the phenomenon of sensationalist Nazi films. This is a problem that bleeds from network to network around the turn of the millennium. For instance, HBO infamously aired a film titled Hidden Fuhrer, debating the enigma of Hitler's sexuality. A completely unironic documentary in which a German historian tries to argue that Hitler was a gay man. You sure about that one, dude? You might wanna look into that one a second time. But when most of you think of general cable documentaries about this topic, Nazi megastructures or Nazi mega weapons are the first things that come to your mind. The multi-titled series which dares to ask, what if instead of looking at the Nazis through the eyes of their victims, we look at them through the lens of all the tanks they built? Fortress Berlin, super tanks, Hitler's jet caves, Hitler's killer subs, Pacific megaships, Hitler's war trains, Hitler's island mega fortress. Yes, let's look at the Nazis in the exact way that the Nazis wanted us to look at the Nazis. These sort of sensationalist shows are obsessed with the Wunderwaffe, or Wonder Weapon, Nazi projects, covering them unironically as if they were generally a positive or brilliant thing in the war effort. And the reason that this narrative makes for good clickbait TV is the exact same reason that it made for a brilliant propaganda program. It instills a belief that there is something ultimately supreme about the Third Reich and how it orchestrated the war, and that can be either inspiring or scary, depending on who you were at the time. There is actually an episode of Ancient Aliens about Nazi Germany, and I avoided watching it for my Ancient Aliens video because I knew it would fit better in this one. Instead of an intense breakdown of all the arguments, I thought it would be more fitting to just set a camera up and film my reactions to all the stupid bullshit they say.
But if the Bell was not a new type of aircraft, then what was it? According to some ancient astronaut theorists, the Bell may have been a time machine.
There have been rumors for many, many years that they went to another planet.
The ironic thing about all of this is years later in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, a similar object was witnessed. Is it possible that the Nazis perfected these things? Or is it possible that the aliens looked like Nazis in uniforms? How bizarre would that be?
This video is gonna fucking kill me, man. There's this big misconception in modern culture that the Nazis were bad people, but they were bad people at the cost of being superhuman geniuses. This is reflective of the belief many people have that cruelty is indicative of hyperdevelopment. People who believe in this often will state that a lot of our modern understanding of biology stems from experiments done by Nazi scientists on the Jewish people. This is not true in the slightest. There is no authenticity to that at all, and it's essentially a white supremacist conspiracy theory. That doesn't mean that if you believe in it, you automatically are a white supremacist. It simply means that you are susceptible to propaganda. When you actually go back and study all of the things that the Nazis are praised for today, you find not only maliciousness, but also stupidity. The Nazis were morons, and this is something people just don't talk about today. Their ideology of genetic supremacy caused them to be pious, and that led to headstrong tactics that failed them time and time again. When you watch these Wonder Waffle documentaries, you'll often see guest speakers brag about just how ginormous and big these weapons are.
Nazi Germany produces a series of bigger panzers with bigger guns.
So if you start to make the gun bigger, everything else will get bigger accordingly.
But the thing is, war isn't a card game meant for children. It's not about having the highest stats out of anyone else on the playing field. I can build the biggest, bulkiest, most expensive plane ever, covered in skulls, and ship it out. But if I then just crash it into a cliffside, I've simply wasted time and resources. How useful are these big, threatening tanks when they break down constantly and no one knows how to move them from the battlefield? Or when they're snowed in because no one planned for there being snow in Russia? The Wonder Waffle program was an absolute failure. Most of the things they spent years working on didn't get past the prototype stage, and a lot of what did go into production simply wasn't useful in the war. And most of these were simply used by German corporations to bleed endless money from the Nazi government. More people died working on the V2 rocket than were killed in battle by the V2 rocket. Today, in the German language, Wunderwaffel is used exclusively in an ironic sense, as if to say, oh yeah, that's gonna be our wonder weapon, right? And while the Germans were wasting their time on impractical ego weapons that they couldn't use, the Allied powers were sending out fake armies made out of blow-up tanks and dropping bodies by the shore with fake intel in their pockets. They were using Looney Tunes tactics, and it worked, because the Third Reich was made up of a bunch of big-headed buffoons obsessed with believing in their own worth. If the Nazis really were geniuses of conflict, if they had technology beyond our wildest understanding, if their skulls swelled constantly to maintain their massively expanding brains, they would have won the fucking war. Breaking down these Nazi documentaries can be very important because I recently realized just how much of my understanding of this topic has been based around films that I saw growing up. For one example, the Ancient Aliens episode I showed earlier was talking about a supposed Nazi superweapon called Die Glock, or the Bell, which they claim was a flying saucer/time machine. I've heard about this for years, and I've always presumed that it was some sort of misunderstood blueprint for a bomb or a tank that never really got into production. But it turns out that the bell never really existed in any form. It was invented by Polish author Igor Witowski in 2000 for a sensationalist book he was writing. I'm only bringing him up to point out that he looks like a perfect mix of Kevin Spacey and Alex Jones. What this reveals to us is that modern pseudo-historians can just make things up, even about extremely infamous times in the past, and they can rework how the general culture tends to perceive that issue, without even really trying. Another claim you'll often hear from these shows is that the Nazis were obsessed with the occult. This is true only to the extent that they seem to think they were destined by divine force to rule, and that apparently some Nazis were into astrology. Those are also things you could say about a lot of rulers in American history. This is often used to claim that the Nazis were looking for ancient artifacts or occult objects that they could use to rule. This is basically just something that these people saw in a Steven Spielberg movie and they took it at face value, like a bunch of idiots. The Nazis were not actively searching for the crystal skulls. They didn't have an obsession with finding religious relics. These are just claims invented by eccentrics to make their interests seem more legitimate. Which, it's weird to say, my thing is real because the Nazis were really into it, but it's a common thread in pieces like this. Let's take a look at one of the first big History Channel documentaries to ever talk about Hitler and the Nazis.
Occultists believe Hannison may have also imparted occult techniques of mind control and crowd domination.
Oh, wow, that's a convenient thing to believe in. It was just mind control, guys. No lessons to learn from World War II. He used mind control.
The date of Hitler's death has a sinister occult significance.
It's believed by some people that he chose April 30th deliberately because it coincided with Walpurgis Night, which is believed to be the most important date in Satanism.
What?
According to one commentator, he was giving himself up to the powers of darkness.
What?
With Hitler gone, it was as if a spell had been broken.
What? At the end of this documentary, they show a bunch of clips of victims of the Holocaust, starved and dying, left behind like they were subhumans worthy of torture and death. And they immediately cut to scenes of the Nazis in their rallies alongside the film's final conclusion, which is apparently...
Many people believe occult rituals and symbols have an inherent power. To others, the power of the occult lies solely in its hold over those who believe in it.
This might seem a little overly general, but the way I judge if a documentary about Nazi Germany is good or terrible is by asking one simple question. What lesson does this have to teach? And specifically, the History Channel occult films are egregious because they don't have a lesson or a point or anything to say at all. If you leave these thinking that paganism or Satanism or astrology were what motivated the evils under the Nazi regime, then what do you think the human race has to learn from this? That the occult caused all this and thus we should avoid whatever the occult is deemed to be? Is the conclusion thus that because we are not the occult, we have nothing to learn? Another good way to tell if a Nazi documentary is potentially bad is if the mention of the Holocaust seems like an afterthought. In the case of this documentary, it's briefly brought up in the final 2 minutes, as if they forgot to mention it and just threw it in at the end. Clearly, to the perspective of the filmmakers, the narrative of conquest and glory was much more salient. If you spend the runtime of your documentary so obsessed with talking about tanks and super weapons and the names of all of Hitler's dogs that you forget to stop and go, by the way, the Nazis were bad, then congratulations, you have contributed absolutely nothing to any worthwhile discussion ever in the history of man. It's actually hard to find a History Channel show, episode, or documentary about this topic that isn't inherently disrespectful in how it chooses to present the subject. But on that note, there is nothing on the channel more inexplicable, more obnoxious, or more, well, History Channel than the 2015 reality show Hunting Hitler. Now, full disclosure, I've only watched the first 2 seasons of this, so no spoilers on if they catch him in the third one. I want to be surprised. Hunting Hitler exists in the unique subcategory of cable content, which I like to call shows where nothing happens. The most obvious example is Bigfoot hunter shows, where experts wander around random forests in different parts of the country with the unironic belief that they're always one commercial break away from making the greatest scientific discovery of the millennium. Now, I am going to end up analyzing Bigfoot content in another video, but only if you hit subscribe right now! The other infamous example is The Curse of Oak Island, where a group of treasure hunters have spent 7 seasons and 112 episodes exploring every corner of this island with not a single discovery ever being made. What's almost justifiable about these shows is that they are travel content by nature. You can easily mute your TV and pretend that you're supposed to appreciate the gorgeous views in all of these different places and not the crack team being steps away from finding their elusive treasure. Be that real treasure, evidence of Bigfoot, or Adolf Hitler being alive. Why would you want that? Content warning. We're going to talk about suicide here. Counter content warning. It's about Hitler's suicide, so who gives a shit? So here's a sentence I never thought I would say on this channel. Let's talk about the primary evidence that Adolf Hitler is dead. First, we have the eyewitness testimony. Throughout the 3 seasons of Hunting Hitler, the hosts make a huge deal out of the fact that no one was in the room when Hitler and his wife killed themselves. No one saw them pull the trigger. But what we do have is a concise timeline from those who were present. Hitler and his wife go into a room, gunshots are heard, 2 bodies leave that room. No one who sees the body survives the war, but to believe that there was a moment in here where there could have been a switch with lookalikes is kind of ridiculous. Not to mention that there's no justifiable reason that Hitler would gaslight his own secretaries into believing a false narrative, since he seemed to think that the invasion of Germany meant death for all of them. The first military to get to Berlin was, of course, the Soviet Union. They were the ones who found Hitler's body and looked into his death. This is one of the main reasons that there is so much confusion in the West about what happened to Hitler, because America and the Soviet Union were very distrustful of each other. The USSR didn't immediately report that they had found Hitler's body, and neither the American population nor government trusted the claim when it eventually came out. Red Scare propaganda, claiming that the USSR was evil, inept, or both, was probably the key motivating factor in the American belief that Hitler was still alive. If the US Army had found his body instead, such doubts probably would have been seen as unpatriotic. So let's talk about forensics. We've got pictures of bones incoming, just in case that's something that makes you feel uncomfortable. Again though, it's Hitler's bones, so who cares? We currently have 2 pieces of forensic evidence involved in this case, a piece of a skull and fragments of a jawbone. For over 6 decades, it was generally believed that both of these belonged to Adolf Hitler. However, in 2009, DNA tests were done on the skull and proved that they actually belonged to a woman in her 30s, implying that this was actually the skull of Eva Braun, who fits that profile. The show milks the hell out of this. The doubt and confusion over this fragment of bone is the key construct for the narrative presented. To the showrunners, the fragment of skull not belonging to Adolf Hitler proves that there is some conspiracy. However, the jaw fragments have always been the more important forensic evidence. These have been matched to dental records, proving that they belong to Hitler. Modern testing has backed this up since then. Once you accept this crucial piece of evidence, you have to believe one of 3 things. Theory number 1. Hitler is dead. He shot himself in the head. The place where he died is a parking lot now. Theory number 2. Hitler survived the bunker, he cut out parts of his jaw like he was a cartoon supervillain, and then he went into hiding without a jaw. Theory number 3, they saved Hitler's brain. Obviously, theory number 1 is the only one that you can explain without believing that Russia was knowingly implicit in faking Hitler's death. They would have had to plant the fake evidence, they would have needed to help him escape, and Hitler and Stalin weren't exactly on great terms at this point in history. But Hunting Hitler posits a 4th theory, that the jaw fragments don't exist.
I'm looking at this from an intelligence perspective. There is no evidence that Hitler died in the bunker. But what we do have is more evidence that Hitler could have gotten away than there is for his death.
This isn't an exaggeration, they bring up the skull fragment as often as they can, it's the core to their thesis, and they never mention the teeth. And the reason is that the people on this show are obsessed with Hitler being alive, and they really refuse to even entertain the idea that he's not. So clear forensic DNA evidence has to be ignored entirely. There's a reason everyone universally agrees that this show is a joke, and that's because it is, plain and simple. I really want to know the process they went through when developing the opening sequence. I hope everyone in the show pitched ideas. Okay, hear me out. We suddenly see a spinning swastika, and then we're all inside the swastika. Very tasteful, guys, very tasteful. So because the United States didn't trust the Soviet Union, the FBI actually did start an investigation into the possibility that Hitler was alive. These files were released in 2014 and are the entire basis for leads on the show. Throughout the program, all the hosts constantly brag that there are over 700 pages of documents in these files which the FBI managed to gather in the decades after the war. Which, can we talk about how not a lot of pages 700 pages actually is? Considering that the FBI collects and documents any and all leads that they come across, you'd think they would have gotten more than that if it was actually serious. After 9/11, they reportedly had 2.5 million pages of documents about that event. Do not act like 700 pages is impressive. What's worse is sometimes they show the documents and it's like, "Dear sir, indent, I would like to report a sighting," starts new paragraph size 15 font. There's no consistency in these 700 pages. It's all just local rumors and crank callers like most cases like this. Hitler is spotted all over the world in the days and years after his death, just like Amelia Earhart, just like every famous missing child in the last 150 years. You can't take things like this at face value. The best part is that these guys haven't even read the documents. Instead, they design search engines, and that's how they go through the evidence.
Hitler plane, worldwide, Berlin, date, 1945.
Throw these words in there: escape, plans, fly, plane.
You guys couldn't just read all the documents? It doesn't seem that hard. There's only 700 pages. So the basis of the show is all these guys go to specific places mentioned in these tips and try and prove that it's plausible that Hitler hid there. Not that it's 100% true, or even that there's evidence of it, but that they can't dispute it. The reason they approach the cases this way isn't just that they're working on a show called Hunting Hitler and need to justify the premise, but also because most of these guys have spent decades obsessed over this conspiracy theory. While they keep claiming that they're making an objective analysis with no bias, a couple times an episode they'll let it slip that proving the conspiracy correct is their one and only objective.
We have to, first of all, demonstrate just how bad the evidence is.
But I'm trying to prove that Adolf Hitler was here.
We're out here to find truth.
And the more you watch it, the more clear it becomes that these guys are into Nazi culture in a way that's just really, really weird.
There we go. That's the swastika.
There you are. A Nazi coin.
Oh my God. See a Nazi coin. Takes your breath away.
So their main course of investigation is to invent a theory and then look for fringe evidence that some piece of the theory might be potentially realistic. So when they visit a community, their first step is to say, well, Hitler would need a house to live in, he'd need locals to support him, he'd need an underground tunnel. And proving any of those things plausible is their core motivation. These guys really do become Olympic gold medalists in mental gymnastics. There were Germans in this area, ergo Nazis could have lived here. There's a nice house that we got caught trying to break into, ergo Nazis could have rented it. There's a cramped, shitty vent here, ergo Hitler moved to Spain and lived in this church. While the claims made in this show are extraordinary, the evidence never is. And that's an important detail. In one of the earliest arcs in season 1, these two dudes are trying to prove that there is a secret tunnel from the German underground bunker to an airport, meaning that Hitler could have walked about 4 hours from his bunker to a plane. How do they prove this? They start scanning walls in the airport, looking for places which appear to be hollow. Eventually, they just start knocking on the tiles, and when they find a place that makes a sound they like, they conclude that's where the tunnel was.
There's a deviation from the normal pattern, so there's definitely something there.
That's what I want to hear, George. That's what I want to hear.
To find there was a direct connection between Tempelhof Airport to the Führer bunker.
This is so monumental, so huge.
We just now put the last piece of the puzzle together. We connected Tempelhof Airport to the Führer bunker.
That's all they walk away from this with. This wall makes a funny noise, so this is a secret tunnel leading to the Hitler bunker that every government in the world has covered up for 75 years. That's their core discovery for the entire episode. The pilot episode is probably the most egregious example of how they interact with these communities, because they go in, guns blazing, looking for anyone who is alive at the time, with the sole intent of using them to build the narrative that a local community helped hide Hitler.
The team concentrate on tracking down individuals that could have provided a support network for Hitler in this area.
We're trying to find information out about German people.
A brief off-topic thought. Do you guys remember in the first episode of this miniseries where I talked about the time that an Ancient Aliens guest speaker pocketed a piece of an ancient site and then took it home and started cutting it up with power tools? Remember how we all agreed that that wasn't okay? Theoretically, what if someone did this not to an ancient sacred site, but a living, breathing human being? It seems to me that the filmmakers get away with making this series by blatantly lying about its content to everyone they meet. It's rarely clear if any of the guests understand that the show is about Hitler being alive. At one point, they lie their way onto private property by claiming that they're tourists, until the landowner figures out what's going on and angrily kicks them all out. So when they first show up in town, the locals innocently point them to the home of a very elderly man, and this poor man seems to believe that he is helping inform people about this horrible point in history. As he starts talking about how the Nazis tried to indoctrinate children into their propaganda programs. But the people in the dock are here to accuse him of helping hide Hitler. So things don't go great.
Formar fila, todo eso, pero en la escuela.
Standing lines.
Fila de tres. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Drill, military drill. Did they fly the swastika flag at the school?
Sí.
Yes.
They did fly it. I have one more question. I want to push a little bit here. Was he part of the Hitler Youth?
¿Era parte de la juventud de Hitler?
Yes, there were Nazi activities at the school. Is there ability in the area to build a significant underground facility? We're about to find out.
In the first History Channel video I did, I believe I coined the term backyardigans archaeologist, and that's really a perfect way to describe who these assholes are. They run around in their own little world and they think it's all real, but in reality, they're just pissing everyone off. The hosts continue to randomly approach locals, and they're often met with strange looks and puzzled reactions. Whenever they get an answer they don't like, or a local refuses to give up personal information, Nathan Fayou's weird uncle here will give some sort of talking head about how people are afraid to tell the truth, even today.
In this area, there was no big number of Germans.
No, he says he doesn't know anything about that.
70 years after the end of the war, and these people today are terrified to tell us anything. Absolutely a wall of silence.
Quick aside, I did some background research into Flannel Guy here, and he is shady. I'm talking arrested numerous times by the FBI shady, being hired by a sex cult to intimidate witnesses shady, impersonating an FBI agent while intimidating witnesses shady, being prosecuted at 17 for moving explosives for a terrorist organization shady. How the fuck did this guy get through the background check stage of getting hired by History Channel? This guy's in the first 3 or 4 episodes, and then he suddenly disappears from the show. And it's a mystery why, because he seems like such a fun guy to work with.
Come on, get your ass in the vehicle.
Sorry?
Get in. You need to generate the impression that I'm a serious guy. Done this 1,000 times in 1,000 places.
Okay.
Then, of course, we've got this dude who's got the body of Tarzan and the personality of Ben Shapiro.
The military items were the least frequent. That made a lot of sense to me. These are not guys who are going to be losing bullets, dropping magazines, losing guns. These are trained soldiers. They're not going to leave a trace of what they're doing or how they do it. I would almost want to segregate.
One of the most confounding things about hunting Hitler is while they aim only to confirm the possibility of these rumors being realistic, they also seem to believe that none of these leads are contradictory. In other words, if the show looks into 20 towns where Hitler could have hid, he hid in all of those towns and simply constantly stayed on the move.
It may have been entirely possible that Hitler was in Shirata and then got up and moved several months later. Hitler, if he in fact got to Bariloche, was going to say, all right, it's time to move out, to move somewhere else. He's a fugitive. You cannot set up in one place indefinitely because eventually news will get out of your presence.
This broadens the conspiracy and makes it even more difficult to believe. How many secret Nazis must have been involved in this international conspiracy, and how could a federal agency only come up with 700 pages of incoherent ramblings in their massive investigations into this? My favorite theory is that after the war, Francisco Franco let Hitler move into his mansion, but then was like, hey man, if you're gonna live here, you gotta work. And then Hitler became Franco's gardener?
Franco's driver allegedly said a German gardener appeared called Adi Lupus. Adi is the name that Eva Braun used for Adolf, and Hitler loved being called Mr. Wolf, and Lupus is Latin for wolf. So, Adi Lupus.
I love the implication that a fascist dictator on the run would hide Easter eggs in his new name about his true identity. Hello, yes, I am your new gardener. My name is... I am... T... Führer? So sure, the show isn't totally concrete on which of these stories are true and false, but the one thing they are totally 100% on is who Hitler wasn't.
I mean, Adolf Hitler is not John Wayne.
Hitler was not the Unabomber.
Rule of 3 dictates I should have a third of those, but I only found 2 so far, and I really don't want to watch any more of the show. Anyways, the punchline is supposed to be that I'm now fully convinced that Hitler actually did become John Wayne and then the Unabomber, because I trust these guest speakers that little.
And on May 2nd, Admiral Donitz.
One thing about History Channel shows that we haven't really touched on yet is how difficult it can be to tell which parts are authentically the characters speaking and which are manufactured in the editing process. Throughout Hunting Hitler, we keep cutting between people on the ground investigating in real time and these 2 dudes supposedly doing laptop work in LA. But the way that it's edited and the way that they talk makes it glaringly clear that this is a scripted sequence created near the end of production to stitch all of this together.
So they're going to have to get to another German community, another Nazi-supported community.
But where? But where would you go? Was it possible Hitler could have gone there?
This is the place where we should be sending the team.
Got to do it now.
Let's do it.
The entire timeline of events we come to understand in the episodes probably aren't real, and a lot of what they say, they've been told to say.
We've got some meat here.
However, the longer the show goes on, the more these two actively seem to take a real role in the narrative. For instance, this guy at one point goes on a rant about how he thinks Hitler hid in South America and then started planning, quote, the Fourth Reich, and that he was probably planning to bomb America. Then he says, that might sound crazy, but they said the same thing about 9/11.
This may seem something out of this world, crazy, but if you and I had been talking a couple of years before 9/11 that this was possible to hijack American airplanes and knock down the World Trade Center, you immediately dismiss it. It was the United States which brought down the Third Reich. And only once the United States was brought down could the Fourth Reich come.
I am scratching my head trying to think of real evidence the show comes up with. A lot of the stuff they discover you can figure out yourself by reading one paragraph of a Wikipedia article, and if they don't know those things going in, they probably shouldn't be investigating the Nazis.
Very loose gravel. Definitely a hole here. Look at this. The puzzle started coming together.
When I described this as a show where nothing happens, I meant that wholeheartedly. But worse, it's a show that will stretch a single instance of nothing happening over 4 episodes and 3 cliffhangers. In the final episode, they're convinced that they're about to find Hitler's plane submerged in this swamp. But then it turns out that it's just some old parts of a forgotten dock. And you can tell how defeated and angry everyone is. And the host goes on this long rant about how Hitler didn't die and how he's going to keep fighting.
When I began this investigation, I was completely skeptical. I assumed, without any doubt, that he died in the bunker. Frankly, I don't think a guy like Adolf Hitler gives up that easily. If he's got a way out, wouldn't he take it?
He did find a way out, and he did take it. There's this really ugly running thread throughout this whole show, where these investigators seem to have some sort of unspoken respect for Hitler. Which is a weird way to put it, but it's what you end up seeing.
Not only was Adolf Hitler tactically sound, he was a forward thinker.
The presidential suite is really the only room suitable to put a guy with the clout like Hitler.
Adolf Hitler had a pretty good idea what he was doing. He didn't wake up Monday morning and say, hey, I think I'm going to try to escape.
Moments like this almost make Hunting Hitler feel like a reverse Ancient Aliens. Ancient Aliens is a show about looking at all these ancient cultures and all the things they accomplished, all the great things they did, and saying, hey, these guys were too uncivilized and brutish to have accomplished any of this. And Hunting Hitler is all about looking at the supposed white master race and all of their leaders and saying, hey, these guys were all smart, they were all brilliant, how could they have failed like this? Adolf Hitler was too tactically brilliant and forward-thinking to shoot himself in the head without a backup plan. That's really what it boils down to for these people. And that final rant that this investigator goes on at the end of the first season about how he's a free thinker who knows the truth about Hitler, it ends on the perfect sentence that accidentally encapsulates this entire project.
I never take facts at face value, and I never will.
Yep, that's Hunting Hitler, everyone. I truly could not say it better myself. So let's wrap this up by discussing what is, without a doubt, the strongest piece of evidence this show ever came up with. At the start of season 2, the investigators on the show find a man who claims that his father helped Nazis escape to Argentina during the Second World War. And after pushing him to show any evidence of this, the man runs to the other room and brings back a photo of an elderly man. The man explains that this is a photo of Adolf Hitler long after the war.
My heart's racing a little bit. Since the smoking gun, I've spent the last 12 years of my life looking for.
We immediately cut to the investigative headquarters of the show, where intense 3D analysis is used to prove that the photo, without a doubt, really is that of an elderly Adolf Hitler.
We start looking for things that line up. I got an earlobe, look at the shape of the ear, this shape of the ear here, very similar. Look at how that mouth, they fall right on top. So all of these things are lining up.
Look at how excited some of these guys get over this. You can really tell this is the greatest moment of their lives. Isn't it sad?
It overlays very well. Adolf Hitler, he's alive well after 1945.
I would be pursuing the case.
This was around the time that History aired a documentary about the disappearance of Amelia Earhart, which claimed to have smoking gun evidence that she ended up around Japan, using facial analysis to prove that a photo seemed to feature her in the Marshall Islands. However, as we'll see in a moment, History Channel investigators seem to be incapable of using the reverse image search option on Google, which quickly proved that the image was actually from 1935, 2 years before she disappeared. After this was proven, History Channel quietly pulled all airings of the piece. So you might be shocked to discover that this case of facial analysis is also bunk, and that this isn't really Adolf Hitler. But if that's the case, then who is this a photograph of? Mo Howard. It's Mo Howard of the Three Stooges. Are you fucking kidding me? How the fuck do you make a mistake that massive? Who the fuck was in charge of analyzing this goddamn photograph that they couldn't figure out that it was one of the fucking Three Stooges? How fucking stupid does every goddamn person on this stupid fucking channel have to be that you can't fucking tell the difference between Adolf Hitler and fucking Mo Howard? Recently discovered footage from within German headquarters during the final days of the war appears to show Adolf Hitler squabbling with several unidentified high-ranking members of the Nazi military. Is it possible that these very soldiers were those who helped sneak Hitler out of the country in the final days of the war? And if they escaped successfully, could this trio still be alive today? So, to recap everything we've learned in the past few weeks, this is an alien, this is Atlantis, and this is Adolf fucking Hitler. Usually at this point in the video, I plug a sponsor, but I don't have a sponsor for this video, so here's my Instacart referral code. Actually, out of my next 4 videos, only one of them is going to have a sponsor, and that's not a great idea fiscally if you're a YouTuber. So if you want to help me get to a point as a creator where it's more rational for me to do this from time to time, I suggest supporting me on Patreon. I've just uploaded a Patreon exclusive video for May, and we're gonna try and do one of those every single month, and I'm trying to get to 666 patrons by October, and we're gonna do a fun little spooky video if I can pull that off. It's just a great way to guarantee I can keep making content, and I'm trying really hard to make it worthwhile for you guys as well. I've also decided I'm probably gonna do a little bonus video in June called History Channel Oddities, and I thought it would just be weird stuff the History Channel did that really didn't fit into any of these videos, sort of like a disjointed, skitty review like I used to do. So if you guys have any recommendations for just weird History Channel things that you want to see me talk about, leave those in the comments section below, and probably send them to me on Twitter so I'll definitely see them. But the thing I want you to walk away from this video with is that we are ramping up to the gigantic Garfield premiere, which hopefully will be going up on June the 5th, 2020. I've been working on this one for 6 months. It's one of the biggest videos I've ever done. I've put so much effort into it, and so I just want you guys all to see it. So if you don't want to miss that, and you don't want to miss the final bonus History Channel episode, go down to that box down there, I guess, and hit the subscribe button, set the notifications to all notifications. We've gained a lot of subscribers in the past month, more than I gained in all of 2019, and I'm so proud, and I just really want to keep that train rolling, you know? Okay, for the end slate today, we've got a few options. First of all, if you want to see every video I've done on topics like this, you can check out the conspiracy playlist, and if you just want to restart the entire History Channel saga, you can check out the History Channel /documentary playlist down below. That's going to restart the whole adventure over for you. You can watch this all in one go, or you could watch the video that YouTube has recommended for you, but most importantly, don't forget to click on that little icon on my face and hit subscribe. It means the world to me. With that, I've been Quentin Kyle Hoover, this has been my Quentin Quarantine, And that's all you need.